Our next speakers, we have Rachel Grachowski and Valentina DiDonato. Rachel, I am very excited. We were able to feature a story on her in the last issue of Accessories Magazine. So if you go to accessoriescouncil.org and you click on the magazine, you can read the story and see some of her beautiful work and learn a little bit more there. And Valentina, you may recognize her face, but you certainly are going to recognize her work at Forbes and CNN, and she's a strong advocate. I got to look at some of her writing for women, and we're delighted to have both of you here today.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So again, if you want to put any questions that you have along the way, you can put them in the chat, you can put them into the comments, and I will make sure that we get to them by the end of the session. And again, Rachel, award-winning founder of architectural firm that you started. You're based in Montclair, and we are excited to have you. We got to feature you a little bit in the magazine, but you do retail spaces, commercial spaces, residential spaces, and certainly what the last year has taught us is that we might need to be rethinking our spaces. So I cannot wait to hear all of your thoughts.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Rachel, I'm so excited to be able to speak with you again after our last conversation, especially now in the time of the pandemic. We're still in it. It's starting to feel like a little bit more normal, but I think we're still in it, unfortunately. But through the lens of architecture and design, so much has happened. You know, we've all been at home. We've all needed and wanted to remodel to sort of find a sense of normalcy in our homes where we're working, where we're doing school, where we're also trying to live and find peace. What have you noticed from the beginning to now in terms of the evolution of architecture and design in this unprecedented time?
Yeah, thanks, Valentina, for the question. It's great to be here with you. So, you know, we've been very busy, obviously, through this whole time, really within about a month of the beginning of the pandemic. And so initially, what we saw was a lot of people who really wanted to increase the amount of space that they had significantly. So, you know, all of a sudden you had your whole family there at one time. And so literally like 50 to 80% increase in square footage was what we were getting calls on. But in all honesty, like the objective was not always the need for new space. It was the understanding of how to better utilize the space that people already had. Because many of us, maybe not if you're living in the city in an apartment, but if you're living in a single family home, the likelihood that you have underutilized space is pretty high. Or maybe it's just full of things that you could let go of, that you could use better, right? And so the other part was not just the idea of more space, but also creating space where people could connect with their family members or really just, again, find some peace, some calm, returning to yourself. What we started to see over time is that, you know, there was a little bit more ease between the functionality of the family, and maybe not everybody needed their own separate room. But more interestingly was what we saw happen in the commercial market, which was that after sort of the first peak started to come down, a lot of entrepreneurs were really starting to think about, like, what is the next thing? What are we going to do after this? And so there was this wellness, this infusion of wellness, whether it was in spas or, you know, even, you know, one of our clients who is a superfood, vegan, you know, organic, fast casual restaurant, like it ticks all the marks, right? And it's just really exciting to see.
That's amazing. That really leads into what I was going to ask you next. In terms of, you know, now we're at a different space in the pandemic, and some people feel it's time to bring some people back to the workplace. What are you seeing, and what are you also advising to your clients in sort of the more commercial space on how to make people feel comfortable in the return to the office?
Yeah, I mean, there's the I guess givens, like creating more distance between employees and divisions between desks, as well as updating HVAC systems. But that's kind of like the old story. The new story, as far as I'm concerned, is creating spaces in your office where you can have like quiet time, whether it's a meditation space or the way in which the cafeteria or the lunchroom is set up, or maybe it's even an office that you can a private office that you can book time at. Also, ideas like bringing plants and flowers into the office environment on a regular basis, because, we all know that, whether we're good with plants or not, like it actually does calm us. It reminds us of nature. So those are some of the key elements that I'm focused on right now.
Oh, absolutely. And would you say that there are concrete design changes that you advise now to clients that are coming to you for advice?
Yeah, I mean, we have a client, Universal Yums, who we're just finishing their corporate offices, and they're a company that is like a subscription snack company. So they introduce you to an experience through snacks, and so they already had this really interesting business model, and because of the pandemic, of course, they've grown tremendously. It's a perfect thing when you're stuck at home. And when we started that project, we really started thinking about the concrete things that might affect an office environment in particular. So we really wanted to bring in the idea of home, of a little bit of a residential vibe to that commercial space. So we did things like the office chairs have a little bit more of a residential sort of dining room style, still flexible, still on casters, still has support that you would need in an office environment, but gives you that more relaxed feeling. We also did things like for the carpet in the offices, it looks very much like a sisal. So that it just again has that sort of more organic vibe, this idea that you're sitting in your living room. And then we actually have a room, it's a collaboration room that's called the living room, and it's set up that way. So again, people sort of relax, and it's like, it's not this jarring experience going back into the office where, there's a lot of discomfort that we have to address.
Absolutely. And I'm sure even in terms for like the people that are our friends on the chat that we're on right now, who own shops and have boutiques, even for the clients that come in, to make them feel comfortable. You have such a great design ethos that I'm sure there's intentional thinking behind that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of elements that come into this idea of welcoming and creating a peaceful environment as people come back to these spaces. And I think my primary focus has really always been on bringing the nature in. And we talked about that a little bit, but I think in retail and hospitality, it's the same thing. So it's when you bring in wood that the grains are expressed. And it's not necessarily sleek, but it's this reminder of all of the years, the time that it's taken nature to produce this product that we now have the honor to actually use. It's the lifespan of nature, or it's the stone that you get to see through the movement of the texture. You're seeing the elements as they have condensed over time, or the woven elements, woven fibers that might be on the wall cover. But it's really also this idea that in order to effectively use those elements, you have to have a balance between what is seen and what is not seen. And so I often look at it as either the backdrop is very simple and then the details can shine, or the backdrop is kind of a little noisy and the details are so simple that your eye goes to them. It's like, one or the other.
Do you think that we're on the precipice of an actual design shift in style because of the pandemic?
I mean, I'm seeing it actually. I mean, as you can imagine, I consume a tremendous amount of design content. And, but what's interesting, so what I'm seeing already is almost they're peaceful textures and shapes that are coming together it's almost a very primitive format. And so because of that, I think that's the design, the aesthetic change that we're going to come to. And I'm seeing in particular a lot of this coming out of Europe, where the floors are white, the walls are white, everything's plaster. In fact, we just finished a residential project like this, just a bathroom, but it was like the whole thing was plaster. We just don't do that.
Peaks on social media. I'm very excited to see more of that.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it is just this, I think about primitive forms and textures a lot because I think it's intuitive to us. It's in our DNA. Right? These are things that are familiar to us, but we don't necessarily know that until you see it, right? And we overcomplicate things often because, I guess that's just our nature as humans.
Yeah, I think you're right. But it's interesting to see that perhaps we'll move away from synthetic materials. Perhaps we'll move away from things that are not sustainable or ethical, because now, through the pandemic, I think maybe a silver lining in this moment within the design lens is that everything has to be curated and selected carefully, because everything has potential impact on the environment.
Yeah, I think the other piece to that, just to sort of muse on what you're talking about, is that through the pandemic, there's a realization or a remembrance, at least for me, on what it means to create. So when you're creating fixtures for a store or furniture for a home, there's a lot of creativity and passion and love that goes into creating these elements. And so I think that there may be also a change in finding more makers who are creating, even on a corporate level, because and that is sustainability, right? That in and of itself has many layers of sustainability.
Absolutely. And what's interesting about this time period, where we've all had the luxury of time to reflect and sort of rethink how we live and how we consume, this could really potentially be a market shift, which will essentially create a shift in the products available. That's exciting, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So I know, you've always, in interviews, I've heard you speak on the intentionality of consuming, but also the importance of creating calm for your clients. How can we achieve that in our homes and in our workplaces? Do you have examples and projects you've worked on?
Yeah, first, intentional living or design is really about being in the awareness of the experience, the space, the environment, that you're in. And so the invitation is that people, clients, users attempt to allow themselves into that space, because when you're in that space, you are much more focused on gratitude than lack. And so overall, you have more joy, right? And that can happen wherever you are. Again, that can be retail, hospitality, residential. And so creating calm, I think, is and creating spaces where you can be in intentional living is, again, we've talked a little bit about the balance, the play of textures and nature, but it's also creating the spaces where you can actually return to yourself. So in residential, you and I talked a little bit about this before, where, the idea that maybe you would have a reading nook or a reading room. And it's that space that if that's what resonates with you, you can be in this space and contemplate, I guess many things. Obviously, it might also be a meditation room, or it might be a yoga space, might even be your kitchen, but it's how you ritualize the kitchen. And we've had lots of conversations about creating within our team about that the kitchen, although for many people it's just a kitchen, it's really the space that you feed your family, right? And I think when we go to commercial projects, there's also, again, this ability to create these spaces through intentional design, through the materials, through the balance. It's the language that you're speaking without speaking it.
Absolutely. And that in our last conversation, prior to the article for Forbes, I loved being able to hear from the design point of view, as an architect, as a historian, how the needs of people have changed, especially during this time. And so to carve out a nook that has a spiritual resonance is meaningful and important. It's funny when you compare a home, how they were built maybe in the 50s. It's, the living room, the dining room, because it was conducive to a certain type of life. But maybe life is changing and our needs are changing too. What would you say to that?
Well, I think for sure that's true. I think, and I think this applies both to homes and offices. Like, the pandemic has even spun this further, right? Like, I think that organization is something that we've always needed, but even more so now. And again, this sort of tips back to the creating calm, but it also applies to like how we live now, right? Like, our lives are so fast, and we have so much stuff. I heard a quote or read a quote the other day that was something like, our clutter are postponed decisions. And I thought, oh, that is just so right on. And so if we can create systems in our lives for organization, whether it's like 15 minutes a day, and then having, whether it's the file drawer in the kitchen or it's the desk organizer, so that we don't even have to think about it. It's just done. Because when we arrive at the workplace and our desk is piled high, like with papers crossing over each other, you don't really know what to do first. But when it's all, even if it's just like straight piles across your desk in a relatively organized fashion, you sit down and you're like, oh, I can actually start my day. And so I think that's one thing about the way we live today that we actually, need to be mindful of. I think the other thing is, and this, again, I think this is a work environment thing that's come out of the pandemic, is the culture. So I think the way we live today is, we've realized how much we need community.
Absolutely.
Right? And so we need to start to organize our lives around community. And in the work environment, we have to participate in that. So whether that's the way we have meetings, what type of table we have in the conference room, maybe it should be round. Maybe we should stop with these rectangular tables, right? Like, maybe that doesn't support community. Maybe that's, doesn't really work anymore. And and even understanding boundaries. I think more than ever, we see the many, many roles that many of us play in life, and honoring that, respecting that. So that can happen through design, but it also happens through culture.
Absolutely. So yeah, it sounds like we're really maybe in a bit of a renaissance for design. A big shift might be happening, it sounds like, which is exciting. What would you say are the projects you're most excited about right now? I mean, there's so much happening for you. I should also say, just driving throughout Montclair, I can always spot your designs now. It's like incredible.
Well, thank you. It's just been a very exciting time. We're really lucky in the projects that we get to participate in. One of the projects I'm super excited about right now is Montclair Film. We are working on a new, it's an existing theater that we're renovating. It's a six screen cinema. And we worked with Montclair Film, which was founded as a film festival by Stephen and Evie Colbert and Bob Feinberg. And we did their brick and mortar location in 2015, their first location, which is now their administration and their education center. So we've had a relationship with them and kind of understand the brand and where they're going to go. And Tom Hall, the director, when he realized that this theater was open and it's directly across the street of their existing location, just dove into the vision of what could be created in this space. And why I'm so excited about it is that it's about community. And ultimately, the community projects are what I feel most passionate about. And it's not even only like projects in my community, in this community, it's projects that sustain and build and encourage community. So I'm excited about that one. We have another one that is very interesting as well. They're cannabis dispensaries, and we have done about 5 of them and 1 grow center. And those are exciting because they are on the precipice of, I think, in their own evolution. Like, it's an evolution that they even exist, right? But the states that it's been legalized for a long time, like, they have to continue to navigate and evolve. And so what's happening, each store has something new that's more experiential than the last. So maybe it's smart technology, maybe it's music, maybe it's video content, maybe it's lifestyle. Like, they're becoming lifestyle brands. And so what's right now, the conversation is that it's food, it's music, it's wellness, movement, and they're starting to do festivals and things like that. So it's really interesting to be on the forefront of an industry that people are, depending where you live, some people are just starting to understand it or try to understand it. But, we've already been in it for a number of years, 5 or 6 years, where we've gotten to see such a tremendous amount of evolution already.
Absolutely. And how do you say you go about, what's your process like to deal with a relatively new way of sort of selling a product that has existed for obviously years and years? How do you do that to make it feel accessible, approachable, since it was recently legalized?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it's sometimes it's very brand specific, right? Like, it depends on who your clientele is, because with some brands, they just as an example, we might design so that you have a one-on-one relationship between yourself as the user, as the retail client, and the retailer. So it's one-on-one. And then there are other environments which are a little bit more savvy, where there's a lot of technology involved. But that changes the layout and it changes the aesthetic, because, just like a very high-end retail store, some people aren't going to feel comfortable going into that outlet, or just like the corner dispensary that, you know, maybe is an old gas station, not everybody's going to feel comfortable going in there.
Right.
So you have to know who your client is.
Sure. And design with that in mind.
Absolutely. Whether it's materials, it's the layout. You know, there's a lot of there's a lot of regulation also involved in dispensaries. For me, I always look at it, and I feel like I do this with all retail, that everything is precious, right? And so the way it's presented and the way that the communication is, the education around it is an invitation, you know, and so that the clients actually get what they need.
So exciting. So exciting. And yeah, it's funny, I actually just moved back from Italy, and it's exciting to see the shift in you know, on the East Coast, in the US in general, and what consumers are wanting. And they're really informing themselves. They really have, it seems like, you know, on a mass scale, have ethics in mind, they have sustainability in mind. And I think in the design and architecture lens, that's an exciting thing for the world.
Absolutely. It's been really exciting. Because the other thing is the products even within the industry have changed. You know, over time it was, you know, started out with like a couple gummies and, you know, some bud, and like now you've got drinks and you've got creams, skin creams, and, you know, it's just amazing to see the evolution. And again, like how the excitement about wellness has really infused the industry. It's just been a world of learning and excitement. It's just really fun to be on the edge of I guess evolution.
Absolutely. And I think even Martha Stewart's in the business now, which is fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think I was just even at CVS, and it's not cannabis, but CVS has their own CBD lines now.
Oh wow, I didn't know.
It's very interesting because you see this is true on a lot of these, like CVS, Target, I can't remember where else. They're all producing their own lines. I'm sure they're under another brand, but how they're marketing how they're displaying the product, everything's changing very, very fast.
It's incredible. I mean, this is a very fast-growing market. So, of course, it needs to be sort of designed differently now, for the growing consumer.
You know, I think because it is all focused on wellness, and you see the product and wellness, that's where the architecture must actually pick up the pace, quite frankly. You know, because they need to mirror each other. True branding is when your product and your space are having the same conversation. And I think as architecture and design, there's the beginning of this conversation, but we have a long way to catch up, I think. And you know, some of it is brands taking risks to they're two different teams, right? Development of retail outlets is a different team than their product development, but it's like they need to sort of have a little bit more of a conversation so that there's more unity. And I think in the hospitality industry, it's a little bit further along, quite frankly, where you see hotels who are producing their own or have their own lines, so they're not producing it, of care products, but they're starting to change the materials that they use.
Right, so that they're more sustainable.
They're more sustainable.
Plastic, yeah. Right.
Yeah, and even many more experiences. So again, where the design and the space the design of the space and the experiences that they're having or offering are integrated, right? So yeah, it's a very exciting time.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, this is interesting. The look of many dispensaries on the West Coast look like an apothecary or a luxury boutique. Do you think there are learning from the fashion and beauty industries in terms of creating a customer experience?
I do. I think there's like maybe 3 different dispensary styles.
Mm-hmm.
There's the apothecary style, which I think is the luxury side, right? And then, yes, I do think that they're looking at fashion. I think they're looking at jewelry. They're looking at, high-end jewelry. Again, that's the way I kind of tend to look at it. And then there's sort of this middle zone, which is a little bit more pop culture. So those dispensaries are, integrated often with music, one of them that we work with, Hastoria, who has Raekwon from Wu-Tang Clan as part of is one of their investors or founders. So they're integrating they're integrating a specific culture, whereas I think Cookies has another. I don't remember who it is, but Cookies has like a whole fashion brand. Their look is less apothecary and is more sort of hip youngster. And then you've got like the old school cannabis locations, which are kind of meant to be not just a little bit on the grungy side. Like they're like 3 different populations. And so as the industry grows, like, will they all merge into one? I don't know. It also has something to do with who's using what technology. It has to do with the type of fixturing. Like, I think in the apothecary style, the fixtures tend to be very high level design and exquisite and custom made. And then, of course, obviously, if you're doing, it just sort of travels to the other side.
And it reflects different price points and needs. We have another question here, returning to design in the home. This is from Rosemary, please give an idea how to convert a room as studio for online content making.
Interesting. So I think one of the most important things is, obviously, it's the backdrop, but creating a backdrop that has some sort of texture or movement, and or just like very large scale pattern, right? So if you're, for example, like behind me, I've got, it's like a,
yeah, I was noticing.
It's actually an Eames piece, but because it's wavy, you have different reflectivity, but it's not terribly distracting. I think if you are doing a pattern behind you, it really needs to be like, if it's a floral, very large scale. Also, ideally, you have a window in front of you, at least for daytime projects, and then it's setting up your camera.
Yeah, for the good.
I mean, I don't have the best environment, but
no, it looks great. Another question: do trends that start in architecture and design often migrate into fashion and accessories?
It goes the opposite. It is the opposite. I mean, maybe it's a little double-sided, but when I look at fashion for what's going to happen in architecture and design, it's usually like 2, depending on where you are in the US, 2 to 3 years. I mean, even being in Montclair, 12 miles outside Manhattan, sometimes it can be 12 to 18 months before we see it. When I say in particular color, but it's even detailing. So, or the way faceting in clothing, or maybe even accessorizing, like with belts and jewelry, like the types of metals that you see ultimately become the trend in architecture and design, but it's really after.
Interesting. And would you say that design in general follows like culture shift? like, has the pandemic influenced design? Has, a certain political moment in history, influenced design?
I absolutely think it does. I mean, it's interesting. I was reading an article that accentuates that, and it was kind of mortifying because they were talking about how wallpaper, whatever in the 1700s or whenever it was actually used to like disguise all of the smashed bugs on the wall. And that the white wall came as like this purification, like so that we could see how clean spaces were.
Of course.
And so, I mean, when I read this, I was like, oh my God. I mean, sure, absolutely, it makes sense.
Right.
But, I do think, just as an example, after 9/11, after we started to recover from that, an immense amount of color came into the industry. When you need to heal or you need to start to, there's a change. And so I do think we're seeing a lot of white right now because of the pandemic and the cleanliness. Like, I think that is part of it. Even within our office, we talk about it all the time, that how much we're all in this white moment. But I think probably once we get, please let it be in the next 12 months. Yeah, a little bit of relief. I don't know. Yeah, there's just gonna be a color explosion. And I think there already was, but it was very brief. There was a color explosion in spring when everybody was feeling good, and now it's got to return back. So
yeah, it's true. But it's interesting to see how in accessories and design, accessories for the home, because that's a whole other space as well in design. How they really can reflect the times.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think we will see accessories and accessories for the home move towards a lot. I mean, they already have, but continue in the organic nature. Like, again, you're seeing a lot of matte and muted finishes and textures, and even in the metals, it's similar. Like, you see a lot of, obviously we've been in a brass moment for a while now, but that really flat brass, almost, it's almost as if it's soft. I think that's just going to continue, and it's when you see textures and colors that read as soft, you relax, and that's really what we all need.
So true. Oh my goodness, absolutely. Should we take any questions, if there are any other questions?
I only saw one more question on there because, Valentina, you were nailing them. It had to do with the look of dispensaries on the West Coast looking like an apothecary or luxury boutique. Do we think that they're learning from the fashion and beauty industry in terms of creating the look and customer experience?
Well, we actually got that one. We talked about that one.
All right. I'm sorry. I missed that.
That's okay.
I thought you did that one. Then I think we are caught up. Unless anyone else has any questions, feel free to jump in. And then what I will suggest is that if you want to see some of Rachel's work, check out Accessories Magazine. You can find it at accessoriescouncil.org. And if someone wants to get in touch with you, Rachel, if they have questions or they need help.
Sure, absolutely. They can email me at Rachel, RACHAEL, at rhgdesign.com. You can also find us on Instagram at RHG Design. And I'd love to hear from anyone and talk to you about what your visions are.
Great. Ladies, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. You got your information is in the chat now, so if anybody wants it, you can grab a picture. There'll be a recording of the session on accessoriescouncil.org. You can check out our YouTube channel and hopefully check you out in the magazine. So thank you both very, very much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Valentina. It was really nice to see you both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I wish you both a wonderful afternoon.
You too.